Hashtag the arrival. The first ships appeared on the edge of human space like wounded birds struggling to stay aloft. Admiral Sarah Chun watched the tactical display from the bridge of the UNS Harmony, her weathered hands gripping the railing as dozens of alien vessels limped toward Earth's outer colonies. These weren't the sleek warships humanity had come to expect from the various galactic powers. These were transport vessels, cargo haulers, and civilian craft pushed far beyond their design limits. "Admiral, we're receiving distress signals on all frequencies," reported Lieutenant Commander Torres, his voice tight with concern. "Multiple languages, but the universal translators are picking up fragments. They're requesting asylum." Chen had seen refugee crises before, but never on this scale. The ongoing war between the Zelathi Empire and the Korthak Collective had been raging for 3 standard years, consuming entire star systems in its wake. Intelligence reports suggested that billions had been displaced, but seeing the reality unfold before her eyes was something entirely different. "How many ships are we tracking?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Current count is at 412 vessels, Admiral. But long-range sensors are detecting more arrivals every hour." Conservative estimates put the refugee population at approximately 2 million beings across dozens of species. 2 million. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Earth's colonies were already stretched thin, supporting a human population that had grown rapidly across 43 worlds. The Galactic Council had strict protocols for refugee situations, and they all pointed to the same solution: temporary containment camps until the displaced could be processed and relocated. Chen had read those protocols. She knew what temporary meant in galactic politics. She'd seen the camps on neutral worlds, sprawling cities of desperation where beings waited years for processing that might never come. The conditions were barely adequate for survival, let alone dignity. But what choice did humanity have? They were still newcomers to galactic society, barely a century since first contact. Going against established protocols could mean economic sanctions, trade embargoes, or worse. "Open a channel to Earth Command," Chun ordered. Priority 1 encryption. The holographic image of Director Marcus Webb materialized before her, his expression already grim. Behind him, the bustling command center of Earth's primary military installation buzzed with activity. Other holographic displays showed similar scenes playing out across human space as the refugee fleet spread across multiple systems. "Admiral Chun, I assume you're calling about our uninvited guests," Webb said without preamble. "Sir, we need immediate guidance. The numbers are staggering, and they're still coming. Current projections suggest we could be looking at 5 million refugees within a week." Webb's face darkened. The Galactic Council has already transmitted the standard protocols. They're preparing campsites on 3 uninhabited worlds in our sector. Basic shelter, food distribution, medical facilities. The works. "Sir, with respect, I've seen those camps. They're not equipped for this volume, and they're not designed for long-term habitation. We're talking about families, children, elderly beings who've already lost everything. I understand your concerns, Admiral, but we have to follow established procedures. Humanity can't be seen as going rogue on our first major refugee crisis." "The political ramifications. What about the humanitarian ramifications?" Chen interrupted, immediately regretting her tone. But the image of those struggling ships, filled with desperate beings who had nowhere else to turn, burned in her mind. Webb paused, studying her through the holographic display. "Admiral, I need you to understand something. The Galactic Council isn't just suggesting these protocols. They're mandating them. Any deviation could result in sanctions that would cripple our emerging colonies. We're talking about cutting off trade routes, technology transfers, even basic medical supplies." Before Chun could respond, an urgent chime echoed through the bridge. "Admiral," Torres called out, "we're receiving a priority transmission from one of the refugee vessels. They're requesting permission to come aboard." Chun looked back at Webb, who shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not, Admiral. No direct contact until proper quarantine and processing procedures have been followed." But as Torres continued to relay the message, Chun felt her resolve hardening. "Sir, they're not requesting asylum for themselves. They're asking for medical assistance. They have children aboard who won't survive the journey to the processing camps." The bridge fell silent except for the low hum of life support systems. Through the main view screen, the refugee fleet stretched across the void like a constellation of desperation. Each ship represented thousands of beings who had fled their homes with nothing but hope for a better future. Admiral Chun, Webb's voice carried a warning tone. You have your orders. Understood, sir. Chun straightened, her mind already working through the implications of what she was about to do. I'll implement standard refugee protocols immediately. Webb nodded and terminated the connection, but Chun remained staring at the space where his hologram had been. Around her, the bridge crew waited for orders, their faces reflecting the same conflict she felt in her heart. Torres, open a channel to the refugee vessel that requested medical assistance. Admiral, her first officer, Commander Park, stepped closer and lowered his voice. Are you sure about this? Chun turned to face her crew, seeing her own struggle reflected in their eyes. They were military personnel, trained to follow orders and maintain discipline. But they were also human beings, and the sight of so much suffering was hard to ignore. When my grandmother was a child, Chun said quietly, her family fled a war zone in Southeast Asia. They spent months in refugee camps, waiting for someone, anyone, to give them a chance at a new life. She used to tell me stories about the kindness of strangers who helped them when they had nothing. She paused, looking out at the refugee fleet again. We're supposed to be the good guys, aren't we? The species that stands up for what's right. Torres's voice interrupted her thoughts. Admiral, I have the refugee vessel on screen. The main display flickered, showing the interior of what had once been a cargo hold. Beings of various species huddled together in makeshift shelters, their alien features unified by expressions of exhaustion and fear. In the center of the group stood a tall, insectoid being whose chitinous exoskeleton bore the scars of recent combat. This is Admiral Chun of the Human Defense Force, she said, her voice carrying across the void. Understand you have medical emergencies aboard. The alien's mandibles clicked in what the universal translator interpreted as gratitude. Admiral Chun, I am Nesmother Zoyaxtal of the Vermani Clutch Ship Renewal. We have been traveling for 18 cycles since the Korthak bombardment of our world. Our medical supplies are exhausted, and we have 37 larvae entering critical molt phase. Chun didn't need the cultural database to understand the severity of the situation. Larvae entering molt phase without proper medical support would die painful deaths. How long do they have? Perhaps 6 of your human hours before the process becomes irreversible. 6 hours. The nearest processing camp was still 2 days away, even if they departed immediately. Chun felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Every protocol, every regulation, every political consideration pointed toward following orders and directing the refugees to the camps. But every instinct she possessed as a human being screamed that this was wrong. She looked around the bridge again, seeing the faces of her crew. These were people who had signed up to protect humanity and its values. But what were those values if they didn't include helping those who couldn't help themselves? Commander Park, she said quietly, what's the capacity of our medical bay? Park consulted his tablet. Standard capacity is 40 patients, but emergency protocols allow for up to 90 in crisis situations. And our food synthesizers, currently operating at 30% capacity to maintain ship stores. We could increase to 70% without compromising long-term supplies. Chun nodded slowly. The arithmetic was simple, even if the politics weren't. They could help these people, at least the most critical cases. The question was whether she was willing to risk her career, her crew's careers, and potentially humanity's standing in a galactic community to do what felt right. She thought about her grandmother again, about the stories of strangers who had risked their own comfort to help refugees who had nothing to offer in return. She thought about why humanity had reached for the stars in the first place, and what kind of species they wanted to become among the galaxies. Torres, transmit the following message to all refugee vessels, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Human Defense Force. To all beings seeking refuge, you are welcome in human space. We will provide medical assistance, food, and temporary shelter while we work on long-term solutions. The bridge erupted in quiet conversation as her crew processed the implications of her words. Park stepped closer, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. "Admiral, Earth Command will have my head for this, and yours too." Chen smiled for the first time since the refugee fleet had appeared. "Probably, but my grandmother didn't raise me to turn my back on people in need just because it was inconvenient." She turned back to the view screen, where Nest Mother Zuextal's image still waited. "Nest Mother, we're prepared to receive your most critical cases immediately. Please transmit medical data for your larvae, and we'll have our doctors ready." The alien's chittering translated as overwhelming gratitude. "Admiral Chun, your words give hope to the hopeless. But surely your superiors will not approve of such deviation from established protocols." Chen looked out at the thousands of ships filled with beings who had lost everything except the hope that someone, somewhere, would show them kindness. "Nest Mother, sometimes doing the right thing means being willing to face the consequences later." As the first medical shuttles prepared to launch from the Harmony, Chen knew there would be consequences. Earth Command would be furious. The Galactic Council would demand explanations. Political careers would be ended, and there might be sanctions against humanity. But as she watched the first shuttle dock with the Vermani vessel and saw the careful transfer of tiny larvae who would live because someone had chosen compassion over protocol, Chen knew she had made the right choice. Whatever happened next, humanity would face it with their conscience intact. The real test, however, was yet to come. The refugee fleet continued to grow, and word of humanity's unexpected welcome was spreading through quantum communications across the galaxy. Other species would be watching to see if this was merely a moment of sentiment or the beginning of something larger. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the Harmony, watching as more shuttles prepared to launch, and wondered if she had just started a revolution or merely delayed an inevitable tragedy. Either way, there was no turning back now. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity really stood for. The response, the emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 18 hours after Admiral Chen's unprecedented decision echoed across the quantum communication networks. Ambassador Elena Vasquez materialized in the Grand Assembly Hall via holographic projection, her image taking its place among the representatives of 47 species that govern galactic civilization. The hall itself was an architectural marvel, a vast sphere of crystalline walls that allowed each species to exist in their preferred atmospheric conditions while participating in the proceedings. Ambassador Vasquez could see the Trilaxian delegation floating in their methane-rich environment, while the silicon-based rockweavers communicated through harmonic vibrations that translated as text displays. At the center of the assembly, High Arbitrator Veltar of the Hegemony raised all four of his arms for silence. His species had held the position of High Arbitrator for the past 6 centuries, and their natural telepathic abilities made them ideal mediators for interspecies conflicts. "We are gathered to address the unprecedented actions of the Human Federation regarding the ongoing refugee crisis." Veltar's mental voice resonated through every translator in the chamber. "Ambassador Vasquez, please explain your species' decision to violate established refugee protocols." Vasquez had been preparing for this moment since receiving the emergency summons. She had studied every precedent, every legal framework, and every political implication of humanity's actions. But as she stood to address the assembly, she found herself thinking not of legal arguments, but of the reports flooding in from human space. "Honored arbitrator, distinguished delegates," she began, her voice carrying through the translation matrix to be understood by every species present. "Humanity acknowledges that our actions deviate from standard refugee protocols. However, we believe these circumstances require a response that prioritizes immediate humanitarian needs over bureaucratic procedures." A wave of what could only be described as disapproval rippled through the assembly. The Korthak delegate, whose species was actually one of the primary aggressors in the war that had created this crisis, projected an image of righteous indignation. "The protocols exist for good reason," the Korthak ambassador declared, his mechanical translation unit converting his species' bioelectric signals into audible speech. "Without proper processing, security screening, and containment, these refugee populations pose significant risks to established colonies. Disease, resource strain, cultural contamination. Vasquez interrupted, immediately regretting the breach of protocol, but unable to contain her anger. We're talking about families fleeing for their lives, not some kind of invasive species. High Arbitrator Veltar's disapproval pressed against the minds of everyone present. Ambassador Vasquez, you will observe proper procedures. My apologies, honored arbitrator. Vasquez took a deep breath, reminding herself that losing her temper would only harm humanity's position. However, I must point out that the current protocols were designed for refugee populations in the thousands, not millions. The established camp systems are already overwhelmed, and constructing new facilities would take months. The Zealothy representative, whose crystalline form pulsed with agitation, projected its response through light patterns. The human argument ignores the fundamental issue of resource allocation and security. These refugees fled from war zones. How do we know that enemy agents haven't infiltrated their ranks? How do we know they haven't infiltrated ours? Vasquez shot back, then caught herself again. What I mean to say is that proper security screening can be conducted while providing adequate humanitarian care. These aren't mutually exclusive goals. The debate continued for hours, with various delegates raising concerns about precedent, resource management, and the potential for humanity's actions to encourage more refugee crises. But Vasquez noticed something interesting in the patterns of discussion. Several species remained notably silent, their delegates listening intently, but offering no comments of their own. During a recess, she found herself approached by Ambassador Quinthera of the Symbiotic Collective, a species that existed in permanent biological partnership with sentient plants. The ambassador's bark-like skin rustled as they communicated through chemical signals that the translators rendered as text. Your species' actions have caused quite a stir. Quinthera's words appeared on Vasquez's personal display. Many are calling it naive idealism. And what do you call it? Vasquez asked. Interesting. The ambassador's leaves shifted color, indicating thoughtfulness. My species has existed through 17 major galactic conflicts. In every case, the established powers focused on maintaining order and stability above all else. The refugees were always an afterthought, a problem to be managed rather than people to be helped. Vasquez sensed there was more to this conversation than casual observation. But you think humanity is doing something different? Perhaps. Or perhaps your species simply hasn't learned yet that idealism is a luxury civilizations abandon when they mature. The ambassador paused, their chemical signals creating a complex pattern. There are others who are watching this situation with great interest. Species who have their own memories of being refugees, of being the ones seeking help that never came. Before Vasquez could ask for clarification, the session reconvened. But as she took her position for the afternoon debate, she noticed something she had missed earlier. The silent observers weren't remaining quiet out of indifference. They were watching with the intensity of beings who saw something significant unfolding. The afternoon session brought a surprise in the form of a live transmission from human space. High Arbitrator Veltar had agreed to allow Admiral Chun to address the assembly directly, a privilege rarely granted to military personnel. Chen's image appeared in the center of the chamber, and Vasquez was struck by how different the Admiral looked from their brief meetings at diplomatic functions. This wasn't the polished officer who attended state dinners. This was someone who hadn't slept in days, whose uniform bore the stains of working directly with refugees, whose eyes carried the weight of decisions that affected millions of lives. Honored delegates, Chen began, I speak to you from the colony world of Haven, where we have established temporary shelters for approximately 800,000 refugees. I wanted you to see what we've learned over the past 72 hours. The display shifted to show aerial views of what had once been an agricultural colony. The neat geometric patterns of farmland have been replaced by sprawling tent cities, but these weren't the grim camps that Vasquez had seen in council documentation. These were communities. Beings of dozens of species worked together, sharing resources and skills. Human children played alongside young Zealothy in improvised playgrounds. Korthak engineers collaborated with human technicians to improve water purification systems. This is Sector 7, Chun continued, where Dr. Sarah Martinez, a human xenobiologist, has been working with Trilaxian healers to develop new medical treatments that work across species barriers. In the past 3 days, they've saved over 200 lives that would have been lost in traditional processing camps. The view changed again, showing construction sites where beings of various species worked side by side. This is the expanded agricultural sector, where symbiotic collective refugees have helped us increase crop yields by 300% using techniques that our human farmers had never considered. Delegate after delegate watched in silence as Chun walked them through what was happening in human space. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't the breakdown of order that the protocols were designed to prevent. It was something unprecedented in galactic history, genuine integration. I won't lie to you, Chin said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. This hasn't been easy. We've had conflicts, misunderstandings, resource shortages. But we've also discovered something remarkable. These beings aren't just refugees to be processed and relocated. They're engineers, doctors, teachers, artists, parents, children, people with skills and knowledge and perspectives that make our communities stronger. The Korthak delegates' biometric readings spiked with agitation. This is precisely the kind of naive sentiment that the protocols are designed to prevent. What happens when resources run short? What happens when cultural differences lead to violence? What happens when the economic burden becomes too great? Chen's image turned to face the Korthak delegation directly. Then, we'll figure out together. Because that's what people do when they have something worth protecting. The session ended without resolution, but as delegates began to disperse, Vasquez noticed the patterns of conversation had shifted. The species that had remained silent were now clustering together in urgent discussion. The traditional powers, the hegemony, the Korthak collective, the Trilaxian Empire, remained united in their opposition to humanity's approach. But fault lines were appearing in what had once been unanimous support for established protocols. That evening, Vasquez received an unexpected visitor in her diplomatic quarters. Ambassador Kithura of the Wanderer fleet materialized without ceremony, their energy-based form shifting between various configurations as they spoke. "Your species has done something unprecedented," Kithura said, their voice carrying harmonics that no translator could fully capture. "Do you understand the implications?" "I'm beginning to," Vasquez replied carefully. The Wanderers were one of the oldest spacefaring civilizations, a species that had voluntarily given up planetary homes to live permanently in space. They rarely involved themselves in council politics, serving primarily as neutral observers. 600 years ago, my people fled a dying star. We sought refuge among the established powers of that era. We were processed, contained, managed, and eventually resettled on worlds that could barely sustain us. It took us centuries to recover our strength and independence. Kethera's form solidified slightly, a sign of intense focus. We swore that when we had the power, we would ensure no other species suffered the same fate. Vasquez felt a chill of understanding. "You're talking about changing the fundamental structure of how the galaxy handles refugees. I'm talking about your species accidentally starting a revolution." Kethera's harmonics carried something that might have been amusement. There are 17 species in this assembly who have their own memories of being on the wrong side of refugee protocols. Your humans have just proven that another approach is possible. The implications hit Vasquez like a meteor strike. Humanity hadn't just violated protocol. They had demonstrated that the entire system was fundamentally flawed. They had shown that integration was possible, that refugees could be assets rather than burdens, that compassion and pragmatism weren't mutually exclusive. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we find out whether your species is willing to stand by their principles when the pressure really begins." Kethera's form began to fade. Because tomorrow, the established powers are going to start pushing back. The question is whether humanity will retreat to the safety of conformity or continue down this dangerous path they've chosen. As Vasquez stood alone in her quarters, looking out at the vast assembly complex where the fate of millions was being decided, she realized that humanity had reached a crossroads that would define their place in galactic civilization. They could apologize, conform, and take their place as another minor power following established rules. Or they could continue to chart their own course and face whatever consequences that choice might bring. Somewhere in human space, millions of refugees were building new lives and new communities. The question was whether the galaxy would allow them to continue or whether the weight of political pressure would force humanity to abandon the principles that had brought them this far. The answer would come sooner than anyone expected. Hashtag the pressure the sanctions began exactly 72 hours after the Galactic Council session ended. Ambassador Vasquez watched the economic indicators cascade across her personal display like a waterfall of red warnings. Trade routes closed. Technology transfers suspended. Medical supply shipments diverted. The established powers of the galaxy had decided to make an example of humanity's rebellion. Director Webb's holographic image flickered with interference as the quantum communication relays came under technical difficulties that everyone knew weren't technical at all. His face had aged years in the past week, and Vasquez could see the strain in every line around his eyes. "Elena, I need honest numbers," Webb said without preamble. "How bad is this going to get?" Vasquez consulted her economic analyses, though she already knew the answers by heart. Agricultural imports from Trilaxian worlds have ceased entirely. That's 40% of our food supply for the outer colonies. Medical isotopes from the hegemony refineries cut off. Advanced manufacturing components for our industrial base suspended pending review of trade agreements. Timeline until critical shortages. Food supplies will start running low in 6 weeks. Medical isotopes. We might have a month before we start seeing real problems. The manufacturing components, we're already seeing production slowdowns across 17 colonies. Webb's jaw tightened, and our refugee population is now at 4.2 million and still growing. Word has spread across half the galaxy about what we're doing here. Ships are arriving from systems we've never even heard of. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Humanity's success in integrating refugees had made them a beacon of hope for displaced beings across the galaxy. But each new arrival made the economic pressure worse, and that pressure was being carefully orchestrated by powers who wanted to prove that compassion was a luxury civilizations couldn't afford. "The Joint Chiefs are meeting in 2 hours," Webb said quietly. "They're going to recommend immediate implementation of standard refugee protocols. Full processing camps, restricted access, the works. Marcus, if we do that now, after everything we've promised these people." "I know what it means, Elena. But I also know what it means to watch human colonies starve because we couldn't compromise when we needed to." The transmission ended, leaving Vasquez alone with data streams that painted an increasingly dire picture. But as she studied the numbers, something caught her attention. Buried in the economic reports was a different kind of data, production figures from the colonies that had accepted large refugee populations. She pulled up the detailed breakdowns, cross-referencing industrial output with agricultural yields, infrastructure development with technological innovation. What she found made her call for an emergency meeting with her entire diplomatic staff. The conference room filled quickly, holographic projections bringing together humanity's best diplomatic minds from across the galaxy. These were people who had dedicated their careers to navigating the complex political currents of galactic civilization, and they all shared the same expression of controlled panic. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vasquez began, "I want you to look at these numbers and tell me what you see." The production reports from the integrated colonies appeared on the main display. Her staff studied them with the intensity of people looking for hope in a desperate situation. Colony industrial output has increased by an average of 37%, reported Dr. James Harrison, her chief economic analyst. Agricultural yields are up by an average of 45%. Infrastructure development is proceeding at rates we've never seen before. How is that possible with resource constraints from the sanctions? It appears the refugee populations aren't just consuming resources, they're creating them. Dr. Sarah Kim, the xenocultural specialist, highlighted specific data points. Symbiotic collective agricultural techniques are revolutionizing farming on worlds that were barely sustainable before. Korthak engineering methods are improving manufacturing efficiency. Zealothy crystal growing technology is advancing our computer systems by decades. Vasquez leaned forward, studying the implications. "Are you telling me that accepting these refugees is actually making our colonies more productive and self-sufficient?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you. But there's more." Kim pulled up a different data set. Cross-species collaboration is leading to innovations we never would have achieved on our own. Human intuitive problem-solving, combined with Trilaxian mathematical precision, is producing engineering solutions that are being copied by other species. Wanderer energy manipulation techniques taught to human physicists have led to breakthrough in power generation. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity wasn't just surviving the refugee crisis, they were thriving because of it. The very thing that the established powers were using to pressure them was actually making them stronger. There's something else, Dr. Harrison added quietly. I've been monitoring economic data from other species, particularly those that have remained neutral in the council debates. Several are experiencing resource shortages of their own because their traditional supply chains run through systems that are now war zones or refugee transit routes. Meaning that some of these neutral species might be more interested in trade partnerships with human colonies than anyone realizes, especially if we can offer resources and technologies they can't get anywhere else. Vasquez felt something she hadn't experienced in days: hope. James, Sarah, I need you to prepare detailed proposals for alternative trade agreements. Focus on the species that have remained neutral or shown any signs of questioning the sanctions. Elena, start reaching out through back channels to gauge interest. Ma'am, Dr. Kim interjected, if we're successful in this, we'll essentially be creating a parallel economic structure outside the traditional galactic trade networks. That's revolutionary. Yes, I know. Vasquez stood, her mind racing through possibilities. But maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needs. The back-channel communications began immediately, using diplomatic protocols that technically weren't violations of the sanctions, but certainly weren't in the spirit of galactic cooperation. What Vasquez discovered surprised her. The neutral species weren't just interested in trade, they were desperate for it. Ambassador Quinthera of the Symbiotic Collective was the first to respond, requesting a private meeting that technically violated no agreements, but would certainly be frowned upon by the traditional powers. They met in the diplomatic quarters neutral zone, a space designed for informal conversations between species who couldn't breathe the same atmosphere. Quinthera's tree-like form swayed gently as they communicated through chemical signals. Your sanctions are affecting more than just humanity, they began. The collective's traditional trading partners are demanding exclusive agreements that would prevent us from sharing our agricultural knowledge with any other species. They want to keep our techniques as strategic advantages. But you've been sharing those techniques with our refugees, Vasquez observed, because your refugees shared their knowledge with us. Human vertical farming methods combined with our soil symbiosis have increased yields on collective worlds by 60%. Your people taught us things about plant genetics that we never considered. Vasquez leaned forward. What are you proposing? A formal technology and knowledge exchange agreement. Not just trade, true cooperation. The collective provides agricultural expertise and bioengineering knowledge. Humanity provides manufacturing techniques and synthetic biology research. We create something new together. The Council won't approve any agreement that circumvents the sanctions. Quinthera's bark shifted color in what Vasquez had learned was their equivalent of a smile. The Council approves trade agreements between sovereign species all the time. They don't need to know that our agreements happen to benefit your refugee populations. Over the next 48 hours, similar conversations took place with representatives from a dozen species. The Wanderer fleet offered advanced energy technologies in exchange for human innovations in quantum computing. The Silicon Consortium proposed mineral extraction partnerships that would give human colonies access to rare elements in exchange for new metallurgy techniques. Even some of the smaller Corthax splinter groups, opposed to their government's aggressive policies, quietly reached out about potential cooperation. But the most significant contact came from an unexpected source: the emergence, a collective of artificial intelligences that rarely involve themselves in biological politics. Their representative materialized in Vasquez's quarters as a shimmering geometric pattern that spoke in mathematical harmonics translated into human speech. Humanity has demonstrated something we did not expect, the AI said without preamble. Organic species integrating across traditional boundaries without losing individual identity. This contradicts established models of biological behavior. Is that why you're here? Vasquez asked carefully. Conversations with the emergents were notoriously difficult. They thought in ways that organic minds couldn't always follow. We offer computational resources and data analysis capabilities. In exchange, we wish to study the integration phenomenon. Human refugees are creating social structures that defy predictive algorithms. This is scientifically significant. What kind of computational resources? Planet-scale industrial optimization, medical research acceleration, economic modeling that accounts for variables your organic brains cannot process simultaneously. In short, the tools to make your refugee integration not just successful, but a template for galactic civilization. Vasquez stared at the shifting geometric pattern, understanding that she was being offered something unprecedented. The emergents hadn't involved themselves in galactic politics since their creation 3 centuries ago. If they were interested in what humanity was doing, it meant the implications reached far beyond refugee policy. "What do you see happening here that others don't?" she asked. The pattern shifted, colors flowing through configurations that hurt to look at directly. Traditional galactic civilization is based on species isolation with limited cooperation. Each species develops independently, trades resources, but maintains distinct territories and cultures. This model is stable but evolutionary limiting. But that's not what's happening in human space. Human space is demonstrating true symbiotic civilization. Multiple species developing together, sharing knowledge, creating hybrid cultures that maintain individual identity while achieving collective advancement. If successful, this model would represent the greatest evolutionary leap in galactic civilization since the development of interstellar travel. And if unsuccessful, the established powers will have proven that compassion is indeed a luxury that advanced civilizations cannot afford. The galaxy will continue on its current path until resource depletion and territorial conflicts lead to inevitable civilization collapse in approximately 200 standard years. The weight of that statement settled over Vasquez like gravity from a dense star. This wasn't just about refugee policy anymore. This was about the future of intelligent life in the galaxy. And somehow humanity had stumbled into the position of being the test case for whether that future could be better than the past. As reports continued to arrive from human colonies, the pattern became clearer. The sanctions were forcing humanity to innovate, to find new solutions, to build something different for what had come before. The refugees weren't just being integrated. They were becoming partners in creating a new model of civilization. But models could fail. And if this one failed, the consequences would reach far beyond the humans and refugees who had dared to hope for something better. The real test was still coming, and it would determine not just humanity's place in the galaxy, but the galaxy's future itself. /# the breaking point the attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning, Standard Galactic Time. Captain Lisa Rodriguez was conducting routine patrols near the Kepler 442 system when her sensors detected the massive energy signatures of approaching warships. 12 vessels, displaying the crystalline configurations of the hegemony's enforcement fleet, dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," reported her communications officer. "They're ordering us to stand down and prepare for inspection of human cargo vessels in this sector." Rodriguez felt ice forming in her stomach. The cargo vessels they were referring to were actually civilian transports carrying nearly 50,000 refugees to new settlements on Kepler 442b. Families who had been traveling for weeks, children who had finally started to believe they were safe, elderly beings who had lived through too many wars already. "Send a priority transmission to Fleet Command," she ordered. Then, open a channel to the hegemony vessels. The main screen flickered to show the interior of a hegemony command bridge, its geometric patterns and crystalline formations a stark contrast to the organic curves of human ship design. High Enforcer Zalthek materialized in the transmission, his 4 arms spread in a gesture that human databases interpreted as either greeting or threat display. "Captain Rodriguez, you will order all human vessels in this system to heave for immediate inspection. We have credible intelligence that weapons and contraband are being smuggled to illegal refugee settlements." "High Enforcer, these are civilian vessels transporting families to legally established colonies. They have no military cargo and pose no threat to galactic security. That determination is not yours to make, Captain. Stand aside or be removed." The transmission ended, leaving Rodriguez staring at tactical displays that showed her single cruiser facing off against a force that outgunned her 20-1. Behind her, the civilian transports continued their slow progress toward Kepler 442b, completely unaware that their lives hung in the balance of decisions made in distant council chambers. "Captain," her tactical officer spoke quietly. "Long-range sensors are detecting similar enforcement fleets approaching refugee convoys throughout human space. This is coordinated." Rodriguez understood immediately. This wasn't about contraband or security threats. This was the established powers' final attempt to break humanity's refugee integration program. If they could force the civilian transports back to processing camps, if they could demonstrate that human protection was meaningless against galactic authority, they could end this experiment once and for all. "Open a general channel to all human vessels in the system," she ordered. "This is Captain Rodriguez to all ships. We are facing a situation that requires immediate cooperation. I need every civilian captain to maintain current course and speed toward Kepler 442b. Do not, under any circumstances, allow boarding parties or submit to inspection demands. Continue to your destination." The responses came back quickly, voices carrying fear, but also determination. These weren't military personnel, but they had spent months watching humans and refugees work together to build something new. They weren't going to abandon that now. "Rodriguez, this is Captain Singh of the transport vessel New Horizons. We're carrying 12,000 refugees, including 3,000 younglings. If you're telling us to run, we'll run. This is Captain Shun of the Stellar Dream. My passengers have been through hell to get this far. If you think we're turning back now, you don't understand what we're fighting for." One by one, the civilian captains confirmed their commitment to continue. Rodriguez felt a surge of pride in her species, even as tactical analysis showed that their position was hopeless against traditional military thinking. But traditional military thinking hadn't accounted for what happened next. The first ships to arrive weren't human reinforcements. They were Wanderer fleet vessels, their energy-based hulls shimmering into existence around the human convoy like guardian spirits. The Wanderers had never involved themselves in galactic military conflicts, but their technology was legendary for its defensive capabilities. "This is Fleet Singer Velshan of the Wanderer Fleet," came a transmission that somehow reached every ship in the system simultaneously. "We are exercising our ancient right of protection for refugee vessels. Any attempt to interfere with these transports will be met with appropriate response." High Enforcer Zalthek's response was immediate and sharp. "Fleet Singer, the Wanderer Fleet has no legal authority in this matter. These vessels are in violation of Galactic Council sanctions and must be inspected. The Wanderer Fleet recognizes no authority higher than the right of beings to seek refuge from death," Velshan replied calmly. "This principle predates your council by millennia, and we will defend it regardless of political convenience." But the Wanderers weren't the only ones arriving. Symbiotic collective bioships began emerging from hyperspace, their living hulls pulsing with defensive energy. Silicon Consortium mining vessels, heavily armored and built to withstand asteroid impacts, moved to protect the civilian transports. Even ships from species Rodriguez didn't recognize were joining the protective formation. "Captain," her communications officer reported with awe in her voice, "I'm reading over 40 vessels from 17 different species. They're all taking defensive positions around our convoy." The tactical display showed something unprecedented in galactic history. A multi-species fleet united not by military alliance or political treaty, but by shared commitment to protecting refugees. These were species who had accepted alternative trade agreements with humanity, who had benefited from refugee integration programs, who had decided that the old ways of doing things were no longer acceptable. High Enforcer Zalthek's frustration was evident even through the universal translators. "This is illegal interference with lawful enforcement actions. The Galactic Council will do what exactly?" The new voice belonged to Ambassador Kethera of the Wanderers, but their ship's transmission was being boosted by every vessel in the protective formation. "Sanction us all? Declare war on half the species in known space. Or perhaps you'll realize that the old order is crumbling and something new is taking its place." The standoff continued for 6 hours, with hegemony enforcement fleets facing off against an increasingly diverse coalition of species who had committed themselves to protecting the refugee transports. Neither side was willing to fire the first shot in what could become a galactic war, but neither was willing to back down from their principles. The resolution came from an unexpected source: the refugees themselves. Dr. Zyx Tao, the nest mother whose larvae had been among the first saved by Admiral Chen's decision, requested permission to address both fleets. Her transmission reached every ship in the system, her chittering voice carrying the weight of someone who had lost everything and found hope again. "I speak for the beings aboard these transports," she began. "We have traveled across the galaxy, seeking not charity, but the chance to contribute to something greater than ourselves. For months, we have worked alongside humans to build new communities, to share knowledge, to create something that benefits everyone." Her image was broadcast from the transport vessel, showing the mixed communities that had developed during the journey. Human children learning Trilaxian mathematics, Korthak engineers teaching human technicians advanced construction techniques, symbiotic collective farmers working with human botanists to develop new crops. "We are not burdens to be managed or problems to be solved," Dr. Zyx Tao continued. "We are builders, teachers, healers, innovators. We offer our skills not because we must, but because we have finally found a civilization that values what we can contribute rather than simply tolerating our existence." She paused, her mandibles clicking in a pattern that the universal translators rendered as profound sadness. "If you send us back to processing camps, you will not just be destroying our lives. You will be destroying the proof that the galaxy can be better than it has been. You will be choosing fear over hope, isolation over cooperation, the failed past over a successful future." The transmission ended, leaving silence that stretched across space like a hell breath. On the Hegemony command ship, High Enforcer Zalthek studied tactical displays that showed the unprecedented coalition arrayed against him. Behind him, his officers waited for orders that could reshape galactic civilization or tear it apart. Captain Rodriguez watched the same displays from her bridge, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether humanity's experiment in refugee integration would survive or become a footnote in galactic history. Around her, beings from dozens of species maintained their protective formation, their weapons powered but not targeted, their shields raised but not aggressive. The decision, when it came, surprised everyone. "All Hegemony vessels, this is High Enforcer Zalthek. We are withdrawing from this system pending further review of enforcement protocols." As the crystalline ships began moving away from the convoy, Rodriguez felt the tension on her bridge release like a snapping cable. But she knew this wasn't over. This was just the first major confrontation in what was becoming a fundamental transformation of galactic civilization. "Captain," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving messages from human colonies throughout our space. Similar confrontations are occurring across 17 systems, but in every case, multi-species coalitions are protecting our refugee transports." Rodriguez nodded, understanding that something irreversible had just occurred. The galaxy had chosen sides, and more species than anyone had expected had chosen the side of compassion over control, cooperation over domination. But choices came with consequences, and the established powers weren't going to abandon centuries of control without a fight. The real conflict was just beginning, and its outcome would determine whether the galaxy moved forward into a new era of cooperation or backward into the darker patterns of its past. As the refugee transports continued their journey toward Kepler 442b, protected by their unprecedented escort, Captain Rodriguez realized she had just witnessed the birth of something new in galactic history. Whether it would survive long enough to grow and flourish remained to be seen. Hashtag the new galaxy 1 year later. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in the observation deck of Harmony Station, humanity's newest diplomatic facility orbiting the world that had once been designated as Refugee Processing Center 7. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see the planet's surface transformed into something that defied every prediction the Galactic Council's models had generated. The sprawling camps that had been hastily constructed to contain millions of displaced beings had evolved into thriving cities that blended architectural styles from dozens of species. Korthak geometric precision integrated seamlessly with symbiotic collective organic flowing curves. Human industrial pragmatism supported Trilaxian crystalline spires that reached toward the sky like frozen music. "The numbers still seem impossible," said Director Webb, joining her at the observation window. His appearance had changed dramatically over the past year. The stress lines had faded, replaced by the weathered confidence of someone who had navigated an unprecedented crisis and emerged stronger. Population: 8.7 million beings from 43 species, Vasquez recited from memory. Industrial output: 300% above galactic averages for similar colonies. Agricultural yield: 400% above baseline projections. Technological Innovation Index: off the charts entirely. And the political situation? Vasquez smiled, remembering the chaos of the past year. The Cooperative Alliance now includes 37 species. Trade agreements bypass the traditional galactic networks entirely in most cases. The Galactic Council has officially recognized our alternative refugee integration protocols as a viable option, though they still prefer their processing camps. Officially recognized because they had no choice, Webb observed. When a third of the galaxy's species withdraw from traditional trade networks and create something more efficient, even the most stubborn bureaucrats have to adapt. The transformation hadn't been smooth. There had been conflicts, failures, growing pains that had tested everyone involved. Some refugee integrations had failed spectacularly, requiring expensive relocations and cultural mediation. Resource shortages had threatened several colonies before alternative supply chains could be established. Political tensions with the traditional powers had occasionally erupted into minor conflicts that required careful diplomatic resolution. But the successes had outweighed the failures by such a massive margin that even the most skeptical observers had been forced to acknowledge that something fundamental had changed in how galactic civilization operated. "Elena," Webb said quietly, "do you ever think about what would have happened if Admiral Chun had followed her original orders?" Vasquez considered the question, imagining a galaxy where 8 million refugees had been processed through traditional camps, where species remained isolated in their traditional territories, where innovation continued at its glacial pace. "I think we would have avoided some short-term problems and created much larger long-term ones." The emergences analysis agrees with you. Webb pulled up a holographic display showing economic and social projections. They've been modeling both scenarios. The traditional approach would have led to system-wide resource conflicts within 50 years. Too many displaced populations, not enough habitable worlds, increasing territorial disputes between species. But our approach? According to their models, we've bought the galaxy at least 2 centuries of sustainable growth. Multi-species colonies are more efficient, more innovative, and more resilient than single-species settlements. The integration challenges are complex, but they're solvable problems rather than inevitable disasters. The door to the observation deck opened, admitting Admiral Sarah Chun. She had been promoted to Director of Refugee Integration, a position that hadn't existed a year ago, but had become one of the most important roles in the Cooperative Alliance. Her uniform now bore insignia from multiple species, a visual representation of the multicultural command structure that had evolved from necessity. "The quarterly reports are in," Chen announced, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose gamble had paid off beyond all expectations. Integration success rate is holding steady at 92% across all participating worlds. Resource strain has decreased by 15% as improved efficiency offsets population increases. And we've had formal requests from 6 more species to join the Cooperative Alliance. 6 more? Vasquez raised an eyebrow. That would bring our membership to over half the Galactic Council, including 3 species that were founding members of the traditional power structure, Chun confirmed. The Trilaxian Empire formally submitted their application yesterday. Their representatives cited superior economic opportunities and social innovation as primary motivating factors. Webb laughed, a sound that would have been unthinkable during the crisis a year ago. The Trilaxians have always been practical above all else. If they're joining us, it means they've done the math and decided we're the winning side. "It's not about winning sides," Chen corrected gently. "It's about creating something better than what existed before." She was right, of course. The Cooperative Alliance had never positioned itself as opposition to the Galactic Council, but as an alternative approach to the same challenges. Species could participate in both systems, take advantage of traditional trade networks, while also engaging in the more intensive cooperation that characterized Alliance worlds. What's the situation with the remaining refugees? Vasquez asked. The original crisis population has been fully integrated, Chun reported. But we're now receiving requests from stable populations who want to relocate to Alliance worlds. Not refugees fleeing crisis, but beings who have heard about our multi-species communities and want to be part of them. Economic migrants? More like cultural migrants. Scientists who want access to cross-species research opportunities. Artists who want to explore hybrid aesthetic traditions. Families who want their children to grow up in truly diverse communities. Chun paused, consulting her datapad. We're actually having to implement selective admission processes because demand is exceeding our capacity for integration. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. A year ago, humanity had been desperately trying to figure out how to help millions of displaced refugees. Now, their success had created a different problem. Too many beings wanted to join their communities. There's something else, Chun continued. The Korthak Collective has formally ended their war with the Zelathi Empire. Vasquez and Webb exchanged surprise glances. The conflict that had created the original refugee crisis had been raging for years with no end in sight. How was that possible? Because 60% of the populations on both sides are now living in Alliance worlds, Chun explained. It's hard to maintain a species-based conflict when your civilians are integrated into multi-species communities. The economic incentives for cooperation outweigh the political incentives for conflict. Are you telling me that refugee integration accidentally ended an interstellar war? Not accidentally. Inevitably. Chun brought up another holographic display showing social integration patterns. When beings from different species live together, work together, raise children together, the artificial divisions that fuel conflict start to break down. We didn't set out to end the war. We set out to help people. But helping people turned out to be the most effective peace-building strategy in galactic history. The observation deck fell silent as the three humans contemplated the implications. They had stumbled into reshaping galactic civilization simply by choosing compassion over convenience, integration over isolation. What happens next? Webb asked. Vasquez looked out at the thriving world below, at the cities where her daughter now attended school alongside young beings from dozens of species, where human engineers worked with alien scientists to push the boundaries of what was possible. We keep building. We keep learning. We keep proving that the galaxy can be better than it was. And if the traditional powers try to stop us, they can't, Chun said with quiet confidence. They missed their window. When they had the chance to crush this movement, they hesitated because they didn't want to start a galactic war. Now we're too established, too successful, too integrated into the economic and social fabric of the galaxy. Destroying the Alliance would mean destroying themselves. A new transmission arrived, priority coded from the Galactic Council chambers. Vasquez accepted the communication, and High Arbitrator Veltar's familiar mental voice filled the observation deck. Ambassador Vasquez, the Council has completed its comprehensive review of the Cooperative Alliance's refugee integration protocols. And we would like to formally request technical assistance in implementing similar programs throughout traditional Council territories. Our projections indicate that current approaches to refugee management are unsustainable given emerging demographic and resource challenges. Vasquez felt a moment of pure triumph, followed immediately by the weight of responsibility. The established powers weren't just acknowledging that humanity had been right, they were asking for help in transforming their own systems. High Arbitrator, we will be happy to share our experiences and expertise. Integration specialists from Alliance worlds can begin consultation missions within the next month. We are grateful for your cooperation. The Council looks forward to a productive partnership in addressing these challenges. The transmission ended, leaving the three humans alone with the magnitude of what they had accomplished. In a single year, they had transformed a refugee crisis into a galactic transformation, turning desperation into hope and isolation into cooperation. You know what this means, don't you? Webb said quietly. Vasquez nodded, understanding the implications. It means we're not the alternative anymore. We're becoming the standard. Through the observation deck windows, the sun was setting over the world below, casting long shadows across the integrated cities that represented something unprecedented in galactic history. Children of dozens of species were coming home from schools where they learned mathematics from Trilaxian teachers and art from human instructors. Scientists from every corner of the galaxy were collaborating on research that would have been impossible under the old system of species isolation. Admiral Chun had made a choice a year ago to help beings in desperate need. That choice had rippled outward, touching millions of lives, transforming entire worlds, and ultimately reshaping the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. And all because someone had decided that doing the right thing was more important than following the convenient path. As the three humans watched the lights come on in the cities below, cities where hope had replaced despair, where cooperation had replaced conflict, where the future looked brighter than anyone had dared to imagine, they understood that they had witnessed something that would be remembered as a turning point in the history of the galaxy. The refugees had been saved, but in saving them, humanity had saved something much larger, the possibility that intelligent life could choose compassion over fear, integration over isolation, hope over despair. And that choice, made one person at a time, one family at a time, one world at a time, had proven powerful enough to transform the galaxy itself.